After 3 months, the wait is over.
First chance really for Bergwijn to have a run here, and it's a great run, and it's a fierce shot. And on the break, Tottenham take the lead.
Here's Mopé, 2-1 Brighton with almost the last kick of the game. What a moment that could be!
This past weekend, millions of football fans in England sat in front of their televisions to watch the beautiful game. But just across the channel in France, there was no football to be played.
Meanwhile, of course, as we reported earlier this week, the French season is over. Here are the results of the meeting today. The LFP have decided to leave Ligue 1, League 2 tables as they stand.
While football is back in Germany, Spain, Italy, and England, France is the only top 5 league to cancel its season. But nearly 2 months after its announcement, there are still questions surrounding its cancellation. Today we ask, who really canceled Ligue 1? What do you make of the French league being the only major league to not come back from the coronavirus?
I think as we talk today, the middle of June, when you have close to 90% of Europe's soccer leagues back, it looks extremely strange, I think it'd be fair to say.
Tariq Panja is a sports reporter for the New York Times.
We're talking this morning, a Saturday, after the latest round of Premier League soccer matches in a country that has been blighted by coronavirus more than any other in Europe. So set against that, it looks quite strange. However, you need to roll back the time a little bit and think when the decision was taken. At the time, in April, coronavirus was raging across Europe. Lockdowns were in their most severest forms. The idea of playing soccer seemed an alien concept. It seemed almost unthinkable at that time, with a virus raging. But what struck me as odd and still does, even then, was why the hard stop? Why do you decide in April, when the governing bodies, FIFA, UEFA, have given you until August to complete the season? You have 9-10 games left, which can be done in 4-5 weeks. Why do you decide in April to say we have to have a hard stop? No degree of flexibility in the programme when we're in an environment that almost requires you to be flexible because we're dealing with a virus, with a situation we've not seen before. So that really surprised me, and it still does today.
Well, let's rewind back to March, to the time that we're kind of talking about. On March 7th, PSG's home game against Strasbourg was postponed, and the rest of the games that weekend went ahead as planned. What was the initial reaction after those round of games?
So much has happened since March. The world has, really turned on its head. We're living in a drastically different world than we were back then. If we think of Europe in early March the 7th, when you mentioned that PSG game, this idea of lockdowns, of a virus that was for many people, something that had caused severe damage in Asia, in China, in Wuhan, closed parts of Italy. It just still seemed very strange, scary, but a lot of people didn't, I think, grasp the reality of what we were facing. So when that game was postponed, they thought, okay, that's a measure, not great, this is serious. But again, it didn't seem like this is going to be a nationwide shutdown event, which only days later it did. It was bizarre, absurd, and a little bit frightening, but it didn't seem like this is the way the rest of the season was going to go.
And so then, on March 9th, the French Minister for Sport, Roxana Marcin-Agnew, announced that all Ligue 1 matches until April 15th would be played behind closed doors or limited to 1,000 fans. What were some of the other conversations or announcements kind of after that?
It's within that European context, and it also shows how fast things were moving. So you've gone from one game being postponed on March the 7th. 2 days later, you have the shocking news at the time that games will have to be played behind closed doors for a month or limited to 1,000 fans. Again, that would be totally alien at that point. And then the speed of this thing was just insane, and the decision-making for the powers that be, because obviously then days later you have a complete stoppage, which then within a week of that moment, you pretty much have all of sport suspended in Europe, and most of us locked behind glass in our homes. So, this was a rapidly changing event that went from a let's wait and see to a complete stop.
Yeah, and interestingly, early on, we kind of have two separate communication channels from the government and then also the LFP, which organizes the top two leagues in France.
And this is interesting as well, where France kind of differs. Obviously, the government in a pandemic situation is speaking more broadly in terms of national health, all the various protocols that have to be put in place to just for people to survive the outbreak of the coronavirus. But there's also a connection between the government and French football, which is different to, say, the Premier League in England, where the government doesn't really have a say how the league is run. In France, the LFP feeds into the French Football Federation, which ultimately is under the auspices of the Ministry of Sport, which kind of gives the government way more power over French football than, say, the British government would have over English soccer in normal times. And then you also have in France, a very different way of following the game, I would say, than in, say, again, I'll use the Premier League, which is a more mercantile, more commercial environment where the TV drives everything. You also have quite a voluble, loud fan movement. Organised supporters are normal in France, and they, like their counterparts in Germany at this point, said, there shouldn't be any soccer until the health situation is resolved. And again, at that point, no one knew we were going to be in a situation that dragged on for as long as the hand, that looks for dragging on for even longer. You then also have a situation where leagues across Europe, not just the French, have to make plans. What are we going to do? How are we going to finish these seasons? Because, look, you're in an unprecedented situation here. You have a half-finished season in modern times and all the attendant complications with broadcasters, with qualification for European competition, with promotion and relegation, all of these things that haven't ever been thought about before, because nobody thought that the world would come to a stop, which is essentially what happened here. So then you have to then get a brains trust together and figure out a way forward. And the thing with football is that it's a competition. It doesn't matter which country you're in a league. Unlike US leagues, which are closed, you don't have these ownership groups that are generally working together for the benefit of all. You have them kind of competing in a dog-eat-dog, winner-take-all kind of situation. And what became clear, not just in France, but elsewhere, was kind of a self-serving mentality when it came to how club owners and clubs approached the situation. For example, in France, you had a situation where people were calling for the league to be cancelled completely. They called it blancher, void, annul the league. And that would mean we just start again with everyone where they are, which would mean the teams that were in the Champions League this season, they would be in the Champions League next season. The teams that are in the Europa League next season, they'll be in the Europa League next season. And the teams that were in the league that season would be in the league again. What does that do? It stops the bottom clubs from being relegated, for example, and it ensures certain clubs might miss out on promotion from the second division. And it also means that the teams that were in Europe can continue accessing the revenues that are linked to playing in European soccer. So then you have all sorts of ideas that emerged. You also had, look, let's just not do relegation, but let's just let the teams get promoted, because that would prevent legal action down the road, and that will quieten any threats from the teams that were due in the league. So it was a total kind of situation where all options are on the table, but each club thinking the option that suits us is clearly the best one.
But notably, in mid-April, it still looked like the league was going to go forward. Ligue reported that the LFP wanted to restart the league on either June 3rd or June 17th. So right around this time, the league would be restarting up again. So kind of what happened in mid-April or in April that went from the league thinking that it was going to restart to it not going ahead at all?
I think it's even tighter than that. The timeline's even tighter. So the decision came out, I think, on a Monday to cancel the league. However, on Friday, 2 days before the decision to cancel the league took place, there was a board meeting of the French league. At that board meeting, there was no discussions about cancellation. At that board meeting, there was a discussion about protocols, about how to come back without fans, about how to get the league restarted, about what they're going to do with the TV contracts. All signs pointed to football being played in France again. And these were the key leaders of the French league, and key club executives were in on that meeting. There was even a multi-page guide that was produced, similar to the ones produced by the Bundesliga, the Premier League, Spain, elsewhere, of how to come back. In the minutest details, how many players would be allowed, how you transport the players to the ground, who could access the stadium, how often would tests have to take place, etc., etc. They were on the runway, they thought, to coming back at that point. However, on Monday, the Prime Minister of France, he stood up to make that statement in Parliament to say that soccer would not be coming back until September. And again, what I still find extremely strange, he said in April that the 2019-2020 football season was over. And I was really shocked, because I thought the government obviously has the responsibility and the power to say when sport can be safely played. However, I could not see for the life of me what the hell it has to do with the French government, which season is played. And I'm confused why the French Prime Minister. So there's now a lot of conjecture, a lot of talk here about lobbying from the French Football Federation, lobbying from other interests to say, look, you need to say the season is over, because then we can point at you and say the season is over.
Are you a fan of football today? Then why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full interviews, and extra content. Just go on Patreon and search Football Today. Now, back to the episode. On May 5th, in a newspaper in France, Minister for Sport Roxana Marcenanu explained that the government kind of made this decision in part because of UEFA saying that it had to happen by August 3rd. And, kind of in response in the newspaper Le Parisien, that UEFA said that, actually that was just kind of a suggested date and not a firm date. So is there any more insight as to why the government made this decision?
Let's get this clear, that there was a UEFA guideline for August the 3rd, and you can see it now with the recent announcements about the return of the Champions League.
UEFA have announced that Lisbon will hold the closing stages of the Champions League this year, and it's going to be quite the tournament, because it's going to be a one-and-done knockout-style tournament from the quarterfinals onwards.
They wanted the national leagues to finish and the Champions League to resume on August the 7th, as we've seen now, with the remaining last 16 games and then the event in Portugal to complete the tournament. However, at that time, again, all of this was in flux, flexible. The only thing that was in charge of the schedule was the virus itself at that point, right? So the idea of saying, oh, look, this was the UEFA guideline of August the 3rd. And let's not forget, look, you're talking about, this is in April. You're saying you still have May, June, and July. Things are evolving. Things are changing. Governments have moved their positions almost like an accordion going in and out with what they're saying when you can do them in terms of timelines. So I think the UEFA deadline may have played a part, but it seems a bit more of a red herring. The other part of this story is that the French Football Federation, which is responsible for amateur football as well as top-level League One football, felt that if the amateurs are not playing, nobody should play, including the top division, come what may. So there is that. And then there's also this French kind of exceptionalism that might have played a part too, in the sense that the government really wanted to get itself, involved in this and also be seen to be taking a lead in soccer, which isn't seen in the same light in France. It could be argued as a sport in the same way. It is seen in some parts of French society as more of a negative influence, not this sort of unifying popular sport, as it is in other countries.
But just to be clear, before the French government made this decision, did they consult the clubs about it?
It depends who you are. So everyone's got a story now. No one wants to take responsibility for this decision. The leagues and the clubs and everybody involved from the soccer side say it's the government. And the government say, well, look, it's not us. It's the leagues that ultimately took the decision. And there is an element of truth in that, because the day after the French Prime Minister called the season over, the French League had a board meeting to ratify a decision that was made by the government. In fact, they said, well, look, we had to have the meeting because we had to, according to our statute, this is the process. But when the government says you can't play anymore, you can't play anymore. However, it's just very intriguing as to what influences were at work during this process. Both the French Prime Minister and the President Macron, they have sporting advisors, and you mentioned the sports minister there. There is some conjecture, some talk that they have lobbyists within French football, personal friends, etc., who were lobbying them to kind of err towards this decision. However, nobody has kind of come on the record to say, yep, I talked to the French president, I'm Mr. Executive of X Club, and it was me, and I said this, and Emmanuel and I are great friends, and he did, and no one's going to tell you that. So it's going to be one of these kind of unknowns, apocryphal stories, and maybe we're all going to read about it in 10 years when it doesn't seem so important as to exactly what happened.
Well, that conjecture you're talking about, is best exemplified in a report by Le Parisien, which reported that French President Emmanuel Macron personally kind of talked to 4 key figures before kind of making this decision in the government with the prime minister. It's alleged that he spoke to the owner of Paris FC, who is also a personal friend, Pierre Ferracci, Marseille's president, and he's also a fan of Marseille. And they were in second and obviously kind of wanted the season to end for that purpose. Apparently, or according to this report, he talked to the head of the FFF, or the Triple F, as we've already talked about, and Didier Deschamps. And, in this report, they kind of said each person had a, vested interest in finishing the season. What do you make of that theory? It seems from the outside, obviously, the most logical, but at the end of the day, it is still, there's no named sources on it, and it's still unreported, as you kind of mentioned earlier.
I just think it's one of a number of theories, and look, we're all influenced by our relationships in one way or the other. But in this sense, you could see, Paris FC is a minor club. Let's be clear about that as well. It's in the second tier, I think, and it suited it to be for the season to finish. But the idea that French football will be held hostage by Paris FC seems kind of nuts. But maybe in the round you have so many people pecking in your ear, you then think, well, I'll err with this side, maybe. But again, it just seems a decision that significant. There'll be other things at play. One of the things I heard was Mr. Macron and the French government wanted to be seen as leaders in Europe's response, not just France's response to the pandemic, seen to be acting responsibly, seen to be doing the right things, and to be seen as people who other leaders in other nations would follow. And I understand there was lobbying of a couple of countries, maybe more than a couple, including Germany, from the French government to do the same thing, to say, look, we've made this decision, we suggest you do too, it would be the right thing to do for Europe. And you can clearly see if that was the case, that has backfired. France is totally isolated at this moment in this sense. Soccer is being played to varying degrees all across Europe right now. Seasons at this moment in time look like they're going to be completed, except in terms of major leagues in France, to the cost of millions of dollars to the teams, and perhaps a source of entertainment to the fans who might have wanted it on their screens.
So the Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, makes that decision or, addresses the nation and says that the league is going to be canceled on April 28th. The LFP formally cancels the season on April 30th. After all that, what is the reaction amongst the different clubs in France?
Well, in general, I was kind of surprised with how coolly most of them took it. It was almost like with a shrug of the shoulder in the main. Most of them were shocked and surprised because, like I said, the meeting on Friday suggested all systems go, and then on Monday, this thing is seized up, and players are told, yeah, guys, you're off, you're going on holiday, when they were surprised. There was anger, and that primarily was articulated by the president of Lyon, Jean-Michel Aulas, and the teams that were relegated, because, hang on a minute, they haven't had a chance to fight for their survival. They are now going to be demoted under these awful circumstances. And Monsieur Aulas, again, this is all self-interest. Mr. Aulas, he was suggesting, even before the decision was taken, you must not end the season. What we must do, and he's a very, very loud character. He doesn't pull his punches. He fires up whenever he likes. And he was coming out with all sorts of claims even before the decision. He wanted even a mini tournament to finish the season because his team, Lyon, a team that regularly was in the Champions League, was maybe has been usurped by the emergence of Paris Saint-Germain over the last decade and with all the wealth it has. But before that, Lyon was France's top team and was still regularly in the Champions League. When the season stopped, it was in 7th. And that, from a sporting and financial perspective, that's a nightmare for Lyon. So you could see him. So he was fighting really hard, and there was a degree of anger that Monsieur Aulas ended up taking to France's highest court, along with two of the relegated teams.
And that was just presided in court this past week and last week. What has happened in court?
Monsieur Aulas was defeated. The court ruled that because what he was fighting for was a resumption of the season. He said the season needs to be completed and we still have time. Even though those players were all sent on vacation, the decision that was taken was wrong. It must not happen. Let's get playing again. He failed. So Lyon doesn't get to play again. However, the court did take a decision to suspend the relegation of Toulouse and Amiens and asked the LFP to sort of reconsider this thing, which is the same league that's rejected this 22 league season. So we're at this point in time, I believe we're still up in the air.
So if we look at this from maybe the bigger picture, what does this tell you about French football and the French footballing system?
It tells you that it clearly shows actually that the clubs are not in control of their destiny in, say, the same way as they are in the Premier League. They take the decisions that affect their season. For example, the Premier League, in order to come back, yes, it needed government approval to play soccer, but that's where the government's role essentially kind of ended. As long as the safety protocols are in place, the decisions about coming back are in the hands of the shareholders of the league, which are literally the 20 clubs. They decide which season you're playing, when you're playing. All of the decisions coming back are essentially in the hands of the league. In France, the clubs are weak. That's what it showed. Even if they wanted to play, it wouldn't be them almost taking decisions. They seem to have layers of bureaucracy above them that in many senses are more powerful than them and can manipulate them in directions that they don't want to go. Some people in France say they should have more of a Premier League model. Some of the club owners certainly think that. However, others would say, no, we're just fine you are part of a greater soccer pyramid. Yes, you're richer. Yes, you have all this sort of fan acclaim. You have these big stadiums, etc. But you are part of a pyramid that starts from the amateur level all the way to professional. And you must fit within that framework, whoever you think you are. So those are the discussions that are going to go forward in France. And it'll be interesting to see which side that lands on, whether it's the Premier League model, the mercantile, the commercial model, where the clubs are these capitalist money-making enterprises that govern themselves, or the current status quo.
And something interesting I found or took away from your piece in the New York Times was this little factoid, that only 22% of people who regularly watch Ligue 1 games actively miss the competition, which kind of indicates that there's a bit of apathy towards football in the country that is kind of been exemplified from this situation.
The soccer crowd in some parts of France is still sneered at. It is not a soccer nation in the same way. It's clear it's not the same way. The passion isn't the same as in Italy, in England, in Spain. You feel it, you know it, you sense it. Whether that will change is moot, we don't know. But maybe the fact that that love, that passion wasn't so overt, maybe that led to kind of this decision to just sort of end the season in April. And then I guess the general shrugging of shoulders that followed it, with a few outliers of Monsieur Aulas and a couple of others. No one seemed to really care that much. If that happened in England, I think it would have been a bigger deal. Even if it was the right thing to do, it would have been seen and discussed and been much more of an issue in sort of national debate.
Tariq Panja is a global sports reporter for the New York Times, and for more information on the end of the Ligue 1 season, you can read his recent article titled How French Soccer Fell Apart. This episode was produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today.